Let go or be dragged. It's one of my most favorite quotes, and it aligns perfectly with a core coaching principle of mine, which is take it or leave it. So this is a principle that I give to my clients to help them let things go when they aren't going their way. Being able to take something or leave something, anything at all, means that you have trust in yourself, enough trust that you know that you will be just fine without it. See, we can get really committed to how we think things should work. And then when they don't, we can crash. And the disappointment, it can last for days or weeks or months, or depending on the situation and who you are, it could last for years. And that's why I want to share this principle and 5 others with you today, because I use these myself and I use these with my clients. And I know that when they're practiced, using these principles can take you from feeling like you're stuck and have no choice to feeling much freer, much more empowered to make choices, even when they're not the best choices, and help you move on. And most importantly, give you peace of mind. Let's get started. Welcome to episode 2 of When Does It Get Good? In this episode, I want to share 6 principles that I bring to every executive coaching client. I use these principles myself, and in my work with my clients, at some point, each one of these principles comes up, usually multiple times. And the reason I want to share these with you is, first, well, you and me are still getting to know each other, and you're learning about how I do what I do and what happens in the experience of executive coaching, but also because I know and I have seen these principles help my clients and me move through tough situations with a lot less stress, a lot less angst, a lot less anxiety, less questioning, and more confidence, ease, and just natural fluidity. These principles help get us back on our own side. It helps us see through the emotional clutter and de-escalate the runaway train of emotions that can happen when we are in our spiral. And it can help us regain perspective. Honestly, these principles also help me and my clients tame our egos. And when I say ego, I do not mean like, beat your chest, false arrogance. The opposite. When I say ego, what I mean is it makes things less about them and more about the experience. So it takes them out of it. So there's less emotional meaning to everything. And when we can look at things a little more objectively, so that we have more freedom to make choices around what's happened. Now, full disclaimer before I start, I will intend to switch back and forth between I and you and me, because I am on this journey with you to live a fulfilled and meaningful life. And these principles, they come from my last 25 years of that journey through my own coaching, my own therapy and training and certifications, studying under experts, retreats of all kinds, learning of all kinds, and 2 distinctly different careers, plus a lot of experimentation. So you're getting kind of an amalgamation of all of the learning and experiences that I've had, as well as what I have seen my clients go through. Okay, so let's dive in. The very first principle is take it or leave it. Be able to take it or leave it. Now, my first therapist, who you'll probably hear me talk about quite a bit because we did some very profound work together, he said to me that you will know that you have matured emotionally when you can take something or leave something. You can just take it or leave it. And he meant anything. And when I first heard that, I thought, well, then that means I have to have no feelings about anything. Otherwise, how could I just take something or leave something that was important to me? And that is not at all what he meant. Absolutely, we have feelings about things. Absolutely, we have deep and profound feelings about things that we really care about. But being able to take it or leave it means no attachment. Being able to easily let things go. And I know that the phrase non-attachment comes up in sort of this spiritual sense and this meditation sense. And yes, that is where that particular phrase comes from. But it can feel a little dreamy or even impossible to have no attachment. And, sometimes I even still think like, is it really possible to not have attachment to how something that I've poured my blood, sweat, and tears into would go? And I do think that, yes, it is possible to do that with work. If I can take something or leave something, ultimately what is happening is I trust that I am good even if it doesn't happen. That includes clients, that includes money, that includes relationships, a new job, a house, friendships, or anything that you had your heart set on. Again, this does not mean we don't feel things or that we're impervious to emotions that come with loss or having to decide that, this isn't for me anymore. And I thought that it was, but I have to leave this and walk away. No, not at all. It just means that we trust ourselves enough to know that we are good without something. It's a sense of neutrality that we can bring instead of high highs and low lows. And yeah, this takes some work and it takes some intention and it takes some self-reflection to be able to get to a point where you can decide, I can take this or I can leave this. Now, I didn't really fully embrace this concept until I started my own business. I have been able to take things or leave things over the course of the last 25 years for sure. Some things hit harder than others. Some things took me a little longer to let go. But when I really started to embrace take it or leave it was when I started my own business 5 years ago. So when I worked as a full-time employee, even as a full-time consultant, money just came into the account every 2 weeks, right? Like you get a paycheck. That's one of the stable and predictable things about having a full-time job is that the money shows up. And that was something that I relied on and became very used to. But when you own a business, when you're on your own, it's not always like that. Some months are great. Some years are great. Some months are not so great. Some years are just plain sucky. And we have to be able to ride those experiences and not let ourselves get pulled into this sort of spiral of doom, right? So every time I potentially have a new client, every time there's a new pitch, every time I release some new content, when I am releasing these podcast episodes, I have to take or leave what the response might be and simply put it out there as I believe it should be. And when I meet new clients, when there's potential of new business, I have to remember that I can take or leave what's there with the client. It is not a have to. I am not in a place where I have to grip everything so tightly. Even if I've had a particularly down month or a couple of down months, putting myself in the mindset of I have to hold on to this. I can't let this go. I must get this business. That's way more painful than saying, okay, this is meant to be mine. Then it will be. And I will put in all of the work I need to in order to create this experience the way I want it. And if it doesn't work, then I move on to the next thing. I will be fine without this. The other thing I would kind of get attached to at the beginning of my coaching career was that I would get attached to my clients' transformation. What I wanted for them. I wanted them to see themselves in their amazingness. I wanted them to have all of the change and all of the success that they craved. And I would get really attached to that for them. That was not my job. That is much more responsibility than I needed to take. So that also took me some work to learn to let go. But to be able to take something or leave something gives you freedom. Gives you freedom to be creative and try stuff. It gives you freedom to speak truth and not worry so much about people not walking away or agreeing with you. It gives you the freedom to ask for what you need and not fear being rejected. Take it or leave it is freedom. So that's the first principle. The second principle is you are always at choice. You are always, 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 always at choice, even when it feels like you have no choice. And sometimes the choices that we have in front of us are not our preferences. They are not what we want them to be. They are not what we hoped they would be. They look like, okay, not great, bad, worse. But they're still choices. I had a client who worked with a pretty toxic senior leader, someone who had rage issues, someone who made their whole team feel small. And it was this very weird dynamic where this leader would be abusive, but then sprinkle in these moments of praise so that their team felt like they were being pushed and pulled. Like, am I doing this good or do I suck? Do you like me or do you hate me? And it was this strange experience where when the leader would give them praise, it would feel relieving and euphoric because it felt like they were off the hook and they weren't going to be punished for something. And that kind of behavior can really hook people. It can feel like this addictive quality. And it was wearing my client down, and they felt scared and they felt confused and they felt disappointed and they didn't know if they were coming or going. And by the way, this client was a senior VP. This was not someone who was new in their career and learning to use their voice. This was someone who was pretty high up. And so that means that their leader was even higher. And we had to talk a lot about what my client's choices were in this situation, because the situation was serious. It wasn't just, a personality issue. It was abusive and it was hurtful and it was demoralizing. And so at first there was this belief that they couldn't leave their job without having another job. Now, I know, and I have experienced that belief myself back when I worked in my corporate days. You always have to have something else before you leave, right? The problem with that belief was that it was working against my client. It was holding them in place and not giving them freedom to choose how they wanted to move forward. As long as they were in that environment, they felt suffocated. And so they couldn't think clearly enough to help themselves find a job. And so we had to talk about what the choices were. And if they were to leave before having a job, what that would look like for their family and for their finances. We had to talk through all the different scenarios. And by the way, none of them were very comfortable for my client. So none of them were their preference or their ideal, but they were still choices. And the choice took a little longer than they wanted to activate, because sometimes choices, they can't happen right away. It's not like you can just decide you want to do something and then you make it happen. Sometimes we have to do what's called responsible waiting. We have to create a plan, give ourselves a runway, wait for a certain thing to occur before we can make our move. And that's great. Responsible waiting is a wonderful tool. And I will just say, sort of a side note, responsible waiting is very different than reasonable procrastination. Reasonable procrastination is when we use all of our reasons for why we shouldn't do something. And because we are smart people, we come up with really smart, logical reasons. Then we go find all of our reasonable people, and we create this reasonable committee, and everybody's like, yeah, you're so right. Yes, I would do the same thing. You're always so smart. And they validate your procrastination because your reasons sound so great. That is not responsible waiting. That's just procrastination. But responsible waiting is the grown-up thing to do. We take our time, we decide what the right move is, what our choices are, we evaluate, use discernment, and then we move forward. And sometimes our choices are about how we think. They are in thoughts. In fact, that's some of the most powerful choosing we can do. I don't have control over much to my chagrin in this world. I have control over very little other than myself and maybe sometimes my dog, which even that is up for debate. But we have control in how we think about ourselves and how we think about the experiences and the people around us. We have choice in how we respond and react to things. We have choice about the meaning that we make about things that occur to us. We have choice in how we feel about those things. You get to choose confidence. You get to choose ease. You get to choose patience. You get to choose, I'm not panicking because I trust myself. You get to choose, I am good at what I'm doing. I'm great at this, actually, and believe that. Choosing our thinking is without question the most foundational level of choice that we can activate on. And it doesn't mean anything has to change, because oftentimes when we change our thinking and intentionally choose our thoughts, the entire situation around us could feel different. So what kind of thinking are you choosing? Okay. The third principle, self-awareness is the antidote to self-doubt. So if you stick around, you'll hear me talk about self-awareness a lot. It is the core of what this podcast is. And if you didn't listen to episode 1, go back, give it a spin, because that's where I define self-awareness. When I throw out that word, I can sometimes get eye rolls or like, yeah, I know what that means. I went to therapy for a time, or I've taken some personality assessments. And those are wonderful tools to support us in our understanding of ourselves. But when I say self-awareness, what I'm referring to is the ongoing relationship that we have with ourselves. And that relationship develops through very intentional behaviors, 3 of them, in fact: curiosity, compassion, and acceptance. And using those 3 practices for ourselves helps us develop a strong relationship with ourselves. And when we do that, it means we recognize our value and we know our worth. And that is the antidote to self-doubt. Recognizing your value and knowing without a shadow of a doubt your worth is the antidote to self-doubt. It's the thing that brings you back down to earth when you start to spiral about in imposter syndrome or feeling like you don't belong or I'm not the one for this or I can't do this. And if you think about it, when you have a relationship with someone else outside of you, hopefully you believe them to be worthy of your time and your effort and your love. You give them the benefit of the doubt. And if it's a long-term relationship, hopefully you accept them for who you are. You can do those things with yourself. Believe that you are worthy of your own time and your own effort and your own love. Give yourself the benefit of the doubt. Accept yourself for who you are. The more you understand about who you are, that self-awareness, the deeper that self-awareness goes, the more love you develop for who you are. And the easier it is to move through moments like imposter stuff and self-doubt and the negative spiral and the concerns that you won't find a job if you leave this job before you have another job. We spend a lot of time worrying about not knowing enough and looking foolish or silly in front of people and getting things wrong. All of that stuff can start to quiet when we develop a strong, continuous relationship with ourselves. Because when you understand yourself, it becomes harder to judge yourself. You know what you are. And more importantly, you know what you're not. So you don't waste time trying to be something that you're not, which I think is where a lot of self-doubt comes from. When I'm trying to be something I think I should be, or I think somebody wants me to be, that's when I feel the most doubt. But when we understand ourselves, when we know ourselves, we know what we are and we know what we're not. And then there's no interest in wasting time trying to be something we're not. All right, the next principle. There is no there. And if you can't see me, I'm doing big old air quotes around the word there. There is no there, meaning if you're hoping that you're going to one day get to this place where you wake up and you have all the answers and you feel confident all the time and you know what to do and everybody comes to you because you are the one that can do it all and you never doubt yourself, you're going to be disappointed. There is no there. The more that you evolve, the more there is to learn. I've had clients come into coaching thinking that they will get this sort of 1, 2, 3 of how to be confident or tips and tricks to good leadership. And then they could just go do the thing and then they'd suddenly be this amazing leader. And yes, tactics and, how-tos are very helpful, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that stands between us and our ability to do those tactics authentically. See, the kind of thinking that there is some sort of pinnacle of like being this amazing person that has no cracks in the foundation. That's the kind of thinking that actually prevents us from feeling confidence and self-assurance because we're always comparing ourselves to some imaginary place that we think we should be. We make this stuff up in our head. I should be here. I should be there. I should have made this much money. Happiness should feel like this. Why am I still bothered by this? It shouldn't bother me anymore. Why am I still getting stuck? All of that stuff that we think should just at some point disappear. And it's not that it stays at the same intensity for our entire lives. Absolutely not. We get better and faster at moving through those things, but we are still human. We still want to be validated. We still want to know that other people care about us. Sometimes we just don't feel good about who we are. And that's life. So if you're hoping for, okay, whenever I get there, then things will be good. Things are good right now. You will always be on a journey. And honestly, if we just suddenly got there and there was nothing left to look at, nothing left to learn, how boring would that be? We'd have nowhere else to go. But we do keep getting smarter and wiser. And if you're not growing, you're dying. There is a quote that I love. I'm probably going to botch it because I've been sort of saying it and making it my own for the last 20 something years. And the quote is by T.S. Eliot. And it goes like this: "We shall never cease from exploration. And at the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." Meaning, we go around in a circle, and every time we get to that thing that we thought we should have gotten over or been done with, we're seeing it again, but we're knowing it fresh because we are different. We know more. We are wiser. We are deeper. We have more tools at our disposal. We see these things differently every time. So while there is no there is getting better. There is going further. Things do get easier. You can move through stuff much faster than you did 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And honestly, if you had nowhere else to go, it would just be boring and uninteresting. And I'm not interested in that. All right. The next principle 5, you already know the answer. You already know the answer. It's what stands between you and the answer that you have to look at. All the fears and the doubts and the insecurities and the core beliefs and the assumptions that we make and the worries about getting things wrong and being a perfectionist, all of that stuff is what stands between us and getting to our own answers. There's a huge gap sometimes between us and what we already know. And it is all in that, the worries and concerns and beliefs and rules that just don't work for us. Now, sometimes we also don't know what action to take. Sometimes we have tactical moments in our lives. I've definitely had moments where I just didn't know what to do. I knew I had to do something, but I just wasn't sure what it was. And that's when you seek out the advice of someone who's more experienced or, maybe a little bit older, who has been through what you've been through and can give you some ideas. What I'm talking about are the answers to life's bigger questions. Who am I? Is this what I want? Am I living the life that I expected to live? What is missing here? Why is it missing? Why do I feel this way when I want to feel this way instead? These are the bigger questions that we already have answers to. Now, I work with very, very smart people, so lack of knowledge is usually not the issue. In fact, with the right questions and the right amount of time and attention, they usually, if not always, come to their own answers pretty quickly. Lack of knowledge is not our problem. Sometimes we know too much. We're too smart. We've seen it all. We're overeducated, overinformed. We have all the reasons in the world not to do something. And you know what? They're probably pretty right. But with all of that intellectual power, we often override that quiet voice of intuition and our inner wisdom. If we can quiet ourselves, the answers will come. And this is hard for achievers. I raise my hand and put myself in this boat. It is hard to quiet myself sometimes because we are conditioned to do and probably do a lot of things at once. And if we're not doing something, we're thinking about doing something or giving ourselves a hard time for not doing something because we're conditioned to believe that our worth is attached to what we produce. And so if we're not producing, we're not worthy. So we don't slow down. The thing is that if we don't slow ourselves down, if we don't give ourselves a chance to just be quiet, and I'm talking 5 minutes in the morning. I'm not talking about meditating for an hour in the morning and an hour at night. If meditation is your jam, try it. If journaling is your jam, try it. If sitting with a hot cup of coffee before everybody wakes up, just to sit down and think, try it. That quiet is where answers surface. But if we're always blocking the answers by doing and doing and doing, we will not get to our own answers. You deserve the time to be quiet, have a moment of reflection, and just sort of ponder the things that are open-ended for you, the things that are meaningful for you, that if solved or if answered, could change the course of your life. You deserve that. 5 minutes every morning. Or in the evening, if you're a night owl, giving yourself some quiet and some space. When space is there, stuff shows up to fill it. Okay, the last principle. We all have an essence. I learned this concept from an executive coach that I worked with and studied under. His name is Robert Ellis. He has a body of work called Coaching from Essence, and he's been coaching for about 30 plus years. What essence is your natural way of showing up in the world that adds value without you having to try. It is your natural way of showing up in the world that adds value without you having to try. It is different than your passions and your motivation and your values. It is very different from your strengths or your personality or how people describe you. It is also very different than your coping mechanisms. And I say this and I point this out specifically because when I work with clients to understand and discover their essence, where they first go, if not telling me about their strengths or their sort of dominant personality traits, they will tell me things like, I'm a perfectionist. That's my essence. I'm a perfectionist. I will work harder and grind harder and get all the answers and do it perfectly. Or I am the person that always puts other people first. I don't consider myself, I'm always the most giving person in the room. And while I can understand why that might show up as sort of the first inclination as to what their essence is, I always remind them it is the natural way that you show up, meaning you did not have to learn it, that adds value to the world. It adds value. How does being a perfectionist add value? How does never taking care of yourself and only other people add value to the world? It actually erodes your world. Your essence is something you don't have to try to do. It's what you can't not do. Part of my essence is being a truth seeker. I would be a truth seeker whether I was doing coaching or I owned a chain of pottery painting studios. I would still be the one who's always asking why, how did this come to be? Where did this start? Why are we doing this? What's the point of this? What's the goal here? I'm always peeling things back to try and understand the core truth of what things are. That is something I did as a child, got into trouble for it because I was always asking questions that a small kid, quote unquote, should not be asking. And it's something I can't not do. I'm compelled to do it. That part of me makes me not only naturally curious, but also a searcher and a researcher of things. Understanding our essence helps us see how much more we are than how we typically see ourselves. We live in a world that puts labels on everything. I think it's necessary in some cases to help us organize things like our workplaces and how we do our day and how we connect with people and just sort of understanding how we label them. I think it helps us in our minds to organize things. But what can happen is we can get very attached to those labels and not see outside of them. So for many years, the first 15 years of my career, I was a marketer. I did marketing. And I only saw myself as a marketer. In fact, when I was craving a career change, I was completely stumped as to how to find it because I didn't know how to get out of the identity that I had as a marketer. And it stumped me for 2 years. And so we can get really attached to these labels and they can be fun and they can be charming and they can be very helpful in our lives, but they are not who we are. We are much bigger than that. We are much more expansive. We are much more evolved and evolving. So if you're curious about your essence, I'm going to give you some ways to start to think about it. And I will give you this disclaimer that understanding your essence it's an ongoing process. right? It can be a little mysterious. And so it's not this like, oh, this is my essence and I'm done, right? If that's what you're looking for, set that aside and think about these questions. So first, how would you describe yourself at your natural best? When you're in flow, when things are going well, when you're not stressed, when you're not thinking, you're just being. How would you describe yourself at your natural best? Another really great question is, what were the things that you could get lost in as a kid? And why? What were the things you could get lost in? And one of my favorite questions that I use with clients is, what did you get in trouble for as a kid? Because that's usually where we were being our most natural selves. I got into trouble for asking too many questions. The things that we got into trouble for can be clues to our essence, because that's usually where we're being told to stop it and stop making trouble, because those parts of us, like the jokester or the little rebel or the kid who loves to take things apart and put them back together, or the one who always got into trouble for being too quiet, or me asking too many questions. All of those are natural ways of being. And every time we were told not to do it, we'd get disconnected from that part of ourselves. But now we're grown-ups and we can start to reconnect to those tendencies and ask ourselves, so how would it look to be a little more of a rebel at work? What would a playful prankster do to approach this problem? What would it look like to take this problem apart and then put it back together? Once we start to understand ourselves at the level of essence, we can then take things or leave things. We can see where we have freedom in our choices. We can move through doubt with more fluidity and ease. We are okay that there is no there for us to get to, and we can connect with the answers that we already have inside us. So those are the 6 principles that I bring to every coaching conversation and that I use in my life. I hope that they've lit a little fire for you and they've made you start to question your beliefs about who you are and get curious about what your essence is, or how you may have gotten attached to the way certain things have gone in your life, and if you might be able to let them go. So thank you so much for listening. Listen, episode 3 is a doozy. We're going to break down perfectionism, how it's a lie, and it's totally killing your ability to do your best work, and how you can break the habit of desperately wanting to be flawlessly perfect. I hope you'll listen. Until then, take care. Lots of love and big energy. Bye for now. Hi, it's Zovig. Listen, if you have 10 seconds, pop over to the show page and leave a 5-star rating. And if you have 30 seconds, leave a comment about what you thought was the most valuable about today's episode. It helps make the show more visible to the people who need it. And that's just good karma. See you soon.